Truly, the experiences of the last few weeks have been absolutely unprecedented. The whole coronavirus situation, the crisis, the pandemic that's here is just, frankly, it's been overwhelming in a lot of ways. The tragedy is just continuing to grow. And as I've been paying attention to the media, as I've had conversations with people that I'm connected with, I recognize that there's two basic responses that people have been having to this. The first is this fear-based panic. It's most obviously demonstrated in the hoarding practices that people have jumped in on. Toilet paper, hand sanitizer, soaps, but probably most tragically, face masks and surgical masks that people that are actually treating the disease need to be able to do their job safely. All of that hoarding is done simply out of a place of fear. The second response that I've seen is actually a place of denial. And that denial, I think, is driven in a couple of different ways. I think one of the places that is being driven from, or that we see it, is that some people just simply really haven't been affected by this yet. It hasn't hit close enough to home for it to be real. It's a hoax, or it's just something that's politically driven, or whatever other types of excuses that people have been giving to why this thing is the way it is. What that is it's a denial of the seriousness of the situation. Another way that I've seen denial work is that people just quickly move to statements about what the future is going to look like. They jump to statements about how the future is going to be bright. The sun's going to come out tomorrow. God is in control. We're going to come back stronger. That statements like that jump over the reality of what we're experiencing, don't wrestle with the reality, and move directly to this hopeful anticipation of the future. What I've realized is that both of those responses, a fear-based response and a denial response, are both unhealthy for us. This three-part series that we're going to be embracing and joining in on are looking to walk us through a healthy way of responding to tragedy and crisis, specifically looking at the coronavirus pandemic that we're walking through right now, but that the principles involved in this would hopefully be helpful for you in any tragedy or any crisis that you're experiencing. That first, that we would face reality. That secondly, we would embrace grief surrounding the reality that we're experiencing. From there, we would be able to walk in a hope that is truly built on something solid. This first session that we're going to be working on together is about facing reality. We're going to be doing this through the lens of somebody else that suffered tragedy of some sort. We don't know all the details of the tragedy or crisis that this person faced, but that in Psalm 77, that we hear of a gentleman named Asaph that wrote a poem describing how he interacted with the tragic situation that he was dealing with. And that he shows a way for us to move, to face the reality, to embrace the grief, and to walk in hope. So let's take a look at Psalm 77 together, this first two verses of this poem that he shares and wrote out loud, wrote to himself, wrote to other people to read. Now we get to benefit from his wisdom. So first two verses of Psalm 77. I cry aloud to God that he may hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. Here we have Asaph, and he makes this incredible statement that his trouble is so heavy that he has a couple of things. He cries out loud to God. The second thing is that he's so overwhelmed by the reality of what is facing him that throughout the course of the night that he stretches out his hands in prayer, and they do not get tired because he is so moved by what is going on. I don't believe that Asaph was necessarily a weak man, nor do I think that Asaph was incredibly strong. I think that Asaph was a normal guy like you, like me. But that this tragedy that Asaph was suffering, this crisis through which he was walking was so heavy upon him that his heart was stirred to cry out for help to somebody other than himself. He could not rely on himself any longer. Self-reliance was not there. Independence was not there. But rather that from the depth of his being, he was forced to cry out because he had faced the reality of his tragedy. Have we faced the reality of the tragedy that we're walking through? I know as of the time of this recording that we're talking about close to 34,000 deaths globally connected to the COVID-19 virus. Now, we struggle with thinking and conceptualizing numbers that large. So I thought through it and tried to figure out how is a good way for me to be able to wrap my head around 34,000 people. And to put that into perspective, that 34,000 people would fill the stadium that the Cleveland Indians play baseball in. I want you to imagine in your mind's eye a baseball stadium full of people that have died because of this virus. That's just one layer. The next layer of people that have suffered or have whose lives have been turned upside down by this are obviously the immediate family members of those 34,000 people. That these people have suffered that 8 weeks ago, perhaps, that their loved one was completely healthy, enjoying life, and now 8 weeks later, in the blink of an eye, that they're gone. And that because of the contagious nature of the disease, that they're not even, in some cases, even allowed to say goodbye. They're not allowed into the hospital to say goodbye to their loved ones. Now they're left going, I wish that I could have said this, or I could have done that, or I could have hugged them one last time. The other situation that obviously is a part of the tragedy of this is the way that people have lost jobs and income, that suddenly questions that a month ago, 2 months ago, were not on the table about where's food coming from? Are we going to be able to pay rent? Are we going to make sure that bills are paid, that we have electricity and water? That those questions were not even considered as short as 4 weeks ago. And here we are, and people are going, I don't know how I'm going to make it. This is an incredible weight of tragedy. And that it can be very easy for us, particularly those of us who haven't walked through one of those significant tragic situations, to just go, oh, it's really not that bad. I'm just stuck in my house. And that I would say that's us simply ignoring the reality of this crisis that is in front of us. That we're called into this place in which we should be embracing the suffering of others. We should be mourning with those who mourn, which means that we need to wrestle deeply with the reality of the information and context that's in front of us. That turning a blind eye to it and giving pat answers about how it's all going to get better in the end, or even fear-based practices of hoarding and all of those types of things that we do, that those are simply just ignoring the actual real tragedy that's in front of us. As you do wrestle with the information on the ground, as you do look into the significance, the reality of this tragedy, that may your heart be stirred to cry out for help. Just as Asaph did, that our hearts would be stirred to cry out for help for ourselves and for others in our world. Now, for some of you, maybe crying out to help to somebody else, particularly in Asaph's case, he's calling out to a God that seems foreign to you. And I would say that God wants to meet you in that place of crying out because of the reality of a faced tragedy and crisis. For yourself, maybe if you've lost a loved one, or you've dealt with job loss, or maybe as you've wrestled with the reality of this disease for others in the world, that you've been broken, and that God wants to meet you in that brokenness. And so cry out loud, be moved from the depth of your being to call out for help to this God. I'm convinced that unless we do this first step of facing reality, it will be impossible for us to move forward to the next step, which is embracing grief. In that if we do not follow those two steps, that any type of hope for the future that we have will not be based upon anything solid. If there's somebody else that you know that needs that solid hope, share this with them and partner together to journey through this so that you together can face reality, embrace grief, and walk in hope.